After the nightmare, 1918 to 1923, November 11th, 1918. The world falls silent. The guns that thundered across Europe for 4 long years are finally still. Millions stand among the ruins, staring at a future they can no longer imagine. The Great War is over, but peace has not yet come. Across the battlefields of France and Belgium, the earth is scarred with craters and trenches. Fields once filled with grain now hold the bones of men. More than 16 million are dead, and 20 million more wounded. Whole generations have vanished into the mud. The empires that once ruled Europe, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German, lie shattered. The old order of kings and crowns has fallen. In Germany, hunger and chaos spread. The Kaiser abdicates and flees into exile. Workers fill the streets demanding change. From the ruins of the old empire, a fragile republic is born. Weimar. It promises democracy and freedom, but its first breath is heavy with defeat. In June 1919, German delegates arrive at the Palace of Versailles. They walk through halls once filled with glory, now turned into a stage of humiliation. The victors dictate terms. The defeated are ordered to sign. Germany loses territory, colonies, and dignity. Her army is reduced to 100,000 men. The Rhineland demilitarized, her economy crushed beneath impossible reparations. Then comes Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. Germany and Germany alone is blamed for the war. It is a sentence that burns into the national soul. The people call it a disgrace, a betrayal. The myth of the stab in the back is born. The idea that Germany's brave soldiers were never defeated, only betrayed by cowards, communists, and Jews. It is a dangerous lie, but one that millions will come to believe. While Germany suffers, the victors face their own illusions. France has won, but victory tastes like ashes. 1 in 5 of its young men is gone. Its land lies torn and poisoned by shellfire. Britain, though triumphant, bleeds wealth and strength. Its soldiers return home to unemployment, its empire shaken. Italy feels cheated by its allies, its pride wounded, its anger festering. To the east, the Russian Empire has fallen to revolution. The Bolsheviks seize power, and in 1922, the Soviet Union is born. A new ideology spreads across borders, communism, promising equality but bringing fear. To the rulers of Europe, it is a shadow they cannot ignore. And in the cafes of Paris, Berlin, and London, a new generation tries to make sense of it all. They are the lost generation, writers, artists, and dreamers scarred by the trenches. They speak of futility, not glory. Their words and art become a mirror of despair. The world feels old, disillusioned, uncertain. Across the Atlantic, America stands apart. Its industries thrive, its cities rise. President Woodrow Wilson dreams of a new world guided by justice and cooperation. From his 14 points comes the idea of the League of Nations. But when he returns home, America turns away. The Senate rejects his vision. Isolation replaces ambition. The League is born without its strongest supporter, weak and toothless. Meanwhile, Germany sinks deeper into crisis. To pay its reparations, the government prints more money. Soon the mark collapses. Prices soar beyond comprehension. A loaf of bread costs billions. Children play with stacks of worthless notes. Families burn paper money to keep warm. The middle class, the heart of the nation, vanishes. Desperation replaces dignity. Amid this chaos, democracy loses its meaning. People no longer believe in speeches or ballots. They crave order. They crave strength. And in the beer halls of Munich, one man's voice begins to rise above the rest. Adolf Hitler, an Austrian-born veteran, failed artist, and furious nationalist. He speaks with conviction and fire. He blames the Jews, the communists, and the weak politicians for Germany's humiliation. He promises to restore pride, unity, and greatness. Few take him seriously, but his words resonate with those who have lost everything. In 1920, his movement takes a name, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, and though small, it burns with dangerous energy. By 1923, Germany is at the edge once more. French troops occupy the Ruhr, the economy collapses, protests fill the streets, Hitler attempts to seize power in Munich. His coup fails, and he is imprisoned. Yet even behind bars, his ambition grows. There he begins to write the ideas that will one day plunge the world back into darkness. For now the victors celebrate their peace. The world tells itself the nightmare is over, but beneath the surface the foundations are cracking. The Peace of Versailles is not a new beginning. It is a countdown. The Great War has ended, but in truth it has only paused. The dream of peace is already dying. The rise of extremes, 1923 to 1930. Germany, 1924. The guns have fallen silent, but the wounds of war still bleed beneath the surface. The failed coup in Munich has sent Adolf Hitler to prison, yet his ideas, bitter and vengeful, begin to take root in a wounded nation. Behind the bars of Landsberg Fortress, he writes a book, Mein Kampf. Page by page, he lays out a vision of purity, unity, and conquest. Few read it. Fewer still understand what it will mean. Outside, the world tries to move on. America lends money to Europe. The Dawes Plan eases Germany's debt, and the mark stabilizes. For a brief, shining moment, the Weimar Republic seems alive again. In Berlin, the cafes overflow with laughter and jazz. Women cut their hair short, poets speak of freedom, and artists paint with reckless hope. It is a fragile dream, the golden 20s. But beneath its brilliance, the ground remains cracked and trembling. Across the continent, democracy struggles to survive. Extremes rise on both sides, communism and fascism, red banners and black shirts. The middle ground begins to vanish. In Italy, Benito Mussolini has already seized power. His march on Rome in 1922 has made him Il Duce, the leader. He promises to restore Italy's glory, to revive the Roman Empire. His black-shirted followers march through the streets with discipline and pride. The world watches uneasy but intrigued. In the Soviet Union, Lenin is dead, and Joseph Stalin consolidates power through cunning and terror. He purges rivals, builds the first five-year plan, and turns a peasant empire into a machine of industry and fear. The dream of equality becomes a prison of obedience. In Germany, recovery is an illusion built on borrowed gold. Factories roar, but the wealth is fragile, dependent on American loans. The bitterness of Versailles still poisons the soul of the nation. Veterans drift through the streets with empty eyes, unable to find purpose. Millions resent the Republic, calling its leaders weak and corrupt. To the east, borders shift and new nations emerge. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, young and proud, yet threatened by instability. In Britain and France, politicians cling to the hope that the last war truly was the war to end all wars. But deep down, they know another storm may come. Across the Atlantic, the United States lives through a golden age of its own, the Roaring '20s. Skyscrapers rise, radios sing, and automobiles crowd the streets. The world looks to America as a beacon of modernity and wealth, but the higher the climb, the greater the fall. By 1928, Adolf Hitler walks free. His time in prison has transformed him. The street agitator has become a strategist. The Nazi Party, once a fringe movement, now reorganizes with discipline and ambition. Propaganda becomes their weapon. Posters, speeches, parades, all painting a vision of national rebirth. The swastika spreads like wildfire. The republic appears calm, but it is only the stillness before the collapse. Beneath the surface, hatred festers. Economic growth hides the fragile foundation of loans and speculation. And then, in October 1929, the illusion shatters. The New York Stock Exchange collapses. In a single week, fortunes vanish, banks fail, and millions lose their jobs. The Great Depression begins. Its shock waves cross oceans. In months, factories close across Europe. In Germany, unemployment rises beyond 5 million. Families go hungry again, their savings erased. Despair replaces hope. As fear spreads, democracy begins to crumble. People no longer believe in speeches or promises. They turn to those who offer strength. The communists march under red flags, calling for revolution. The Nazis rally under black and red banners, promising order, pride, and vengeance. In the chaos, Hitler's voice grows louder, more commanding. He speaks not just to the angry, but to the hopeless, to those who feel abandoned by their country, betrayed by history itself. He gives them an enemy, a purpose, and a dream. The message is simple. Germany was great once and will be great again. By the end of the decade, the fragile peace of Europe is dying. The ideals of freedom and reason fade before the roar of the crowd. The stage is set, the players are ready, and the world stands once more at the edge of darkness. The Great War was meant to end all wars. Instead, it gave birth to something far more dangerous, the age of extremes.
Shadows over Europe, 1930 to 1933, the world entered a new decade, and with it, the promise of peace began to crumble. The roaring 20s were over. The lights dimmed, the music faded, and the laughter of a tired generation was replaced by the echoes of fear. In Germany, despair ruled the streets. The economic crash of 1929 had crushed what little hope remained after the Great War. Factories were silent. Men stood in endless lines for bread. Children shivered through winters with nothing but thin coats and fading dreams. The Weimar Republic, once a symbol of fragile democracy, was now a nation drowning in debt and humiliation. In smoke-filled beer halls, voices grew louder. Angry men spoke of betrayal, of enemies within, of a world that had cheated them. They longed not for freedom, but for strength. For someone to lead them back to greatness, and from those angry gatherings, a figure began to rise, a man who spoke with fury, who promised rebirth through unity and vengeance, a man who had already written his vision while imprisoned years earlier, a vision born of hatred, forged in bitterness. Now, the time had come for him to claim his stage. By 1932, chaos had consumed German politics. Governments fell within months. The Reichstag was divided, paralyzed. Amid the crisis, millions turned to the National Socialist movement, not out of ideology, but out of desperation. They saw order where there was chaos, purpose where there was despair. Then came January 1933. The cold wind carried with it a turning point in human history. On that winter night, torches flared across Berlin as the new chancellor took power. The crowd roared his name. Hope returned, but it was a hope built on fear. Across Europe, the world watched in uneasy silence. In Italy, Mussolini had already forged his fascist state. In the East, Stalin's Soviet Union was tightening its grip through terror and industrial might. And now, in the heart of Europe, another regime was rising, one that promised destiny, but would bring ruin. Propaganda spread like wildfire. Radios blared speeches of pride and unity. Banners rose above schools, factories, and town squares. Children saluted before they learned to write. Men marched before they learned to think, and one by one, the voices of dissent fell silent. In the shadows, books were burned, newspapers censored, opponents imprisoned. Germany was no longer a republic. It had become a machine, efficient, disciplined, and utterly obedient. Beyond its borders, the world hesitated. The League of Nations, once the guardian of peace, issued protests that no one heard. Britain and France looked inward, still paralyzed by economic hardship. America, across the ocean, turned its eyes away, choosing isolation over involvement. Meanwhile, in Japan, the army had seized control, launching invasions in Asia in the name of honor and destiny. The fire of militarism was spreading, east to west, nation to nation. By late 1933, Europe stood on a knife's edge. Many believed the worst was behind them, that another war was impossible, but the warning signs were everywhere, written in fire and banners. The peace forged in 1919 was already dying, and yet, in cities like Paris, London, and Vienna, people still danced, they drank champagne, listened to jazz, and told themselves that the world was healing. But beneath the glow of the nightclubs and the hum of radios, the shadows were moving, quietly, steadily, preparing for what would come next. The drums of war were still silent, but in the hearts of men, the rhythm had already begun. By 1936, the illusion of peace in Europe was little more than smoke. While diplomats still dined beneath chandeliers and spoke of treaties and trust, a new generation was already marching, boots echoing on the cobblestones of Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo. The world was changing. And the storm was now inevitable. In Germany, Adolf Hitler, now firmly in power, cast aside all pretense of restraint. The Treaty of Versailles, once a chain around his nation, was torn apart. Factories roared to life again, crafting tanks, planes, and weapons in secret, then in plain sight, and the world did nothing. Across the Rhine, in March 1936, German troops re-entered the demilitarized zone, a direct violation of international law. France hesitated. Britain hesitated, and in that silence, Hitler heard permission. He had tested the world and found it weak. Meanwhile, in Spain, a civil war erupted, a brutal rehearsal for what was to come. The Spanish Republic fought for democracy, while General Francisco Franco, backed by Hitler and Mussolini, unleashed the fury of fascism. Guernica, a quiet Basque town, became a symbol of terror. On an April afternoon in 1937, German bombers of the Condor Legion descended from the sky, burning the town to ashes. For the first time, the world saw cities destroyed from above, the dawn of modern warfare. Picasso would later paint the horror, but the world still looked away. In Asia, Japan advanced deeper into China. The Marco Polo Bridge incident in 1937 ignited full-scale war. Cities like Nanjing were consumed by flames and atrocity. The League of Nations condemned, and then collapsed under its own impotence. The old order, the one built on treaties, promises, and fragile hope, was gone. Back in Europe, the Axis took shape. Germany, Italy, and Japan, united by ambition, bound by ideology, driven by vengeance. Together, they promised a new order for the world, and death for the old one. In 1938, Hitler's appetite grew. Austria was the first to fall. German troops marched into Vienna without firing a shot, greeted by crowds waving swastikas and shouting, "Heil Hitler!" The Anschluss, the union of Austria and Germany, was complete. Europe watched, once again, in silence. Then came Czechoslovakia. The Sudetenland crisis became the next flashpoint. Hitler demanded it, claiming he sought to protect German-speaking people. At Munich, in September 1938, the leaders of Britain and France, Neville Chamberlain and Édouard Daladier, met with Hitler and Mussolini. After tense negotiations, they agreed to give Hitler what he wanted, in exchange for a promise of peace. Chamberlain returned to London declaring peace for our time. But behind him, the world was already trembling. By early 1939, Hitler had no reason to stop. In March, his armies swallowed the rest of Czechoslovakia. For the first time, he seized land that was not German by blood or language. Now, even the blind could see his intent. In the East, another player moved. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader, watching, waiting. He distrusted the West. And the West distrusted him, but both feared war, and so, in the summer of 1939, when Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the world was stunned. A secret protocol divided Eastern Europe between them, Poland caught in the middle. Two predators, circling the same prey, the stage was set, all the pieces were in place, the alliances, the armies, the lies, and somewhere, in the calm before the storm, millions of men and women went about their lives, unaware that history's greatest catastrophe was now only days away. On the 1st of September, 1939, at dawn, German forces crossed the Polish border. Bombs fell on Warsaw. Tanks rolled across the plains, and once again, the world was at war.